Welcome to Afro-Vegan Society's celebration of United Nations World Food Day, featuring the panel, Plant-Based Nutrition for Healthy Black Communities. Support Afro-Vegan Society's work by donating today.
We have some special guests for our wellness panel, and I'm going to have them introduce themselves. Can y'all please introduce yourselves and let everyone know what you do, who you are, where they can find you?
Hi, everybody. My name is Dr. Kadir Ali Huff, and I am a pediatrician and lifestyle medicine doctor based out of the DC area. And I'm on a mission in terms of helping families move from information to implementation around healthful lifestyle habits as a gateway to better health and happier lives. So that's me. Happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course, of course.
Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Judy Brinkman. I'm an internal medicine physician, also lifestyle medicine. I work as a hospitalist and I also have my own business, New Well Health, where I practice lifestyle medicine and health coaching. I'm on Instagram and Facebook at the Plant-Based MD, and I've been plant-based for about 6 years.
Awesome. And my name is Brooklyn Palmer. I am a medical student and a Master of Public Health student in Texas. I'm really passionate about food accessibility and how we can incorporate anti-diet in more of a medical setting. I'm currently just figuring out the best way to move forward and incorporating nutrition and compassion in my career in medicine.
Absolutely wonderful. I love it all. Thank you so much for that, ladies. And once again, welcome to our event for World Food Day for the Wellness Panel. And if anyone doesn't really know what World Food Day is, no worries, I got you. I'm going to give you a few sentences from their website. So they would say that in recent decades, the world has made significant progress in improving agricultural productivity. Although we now produce more than enough food to feed everyone, our food systems are out of balance. Hunger, obesity, environmental degradation, loss of agrobiological diversity, food loss and waste, and a lack of security for food chain workers are only some of the issues that underline this imbalance. So World Food Day is calling for global solidarity to help all populations, and especially the most vulnerable, to recover from the crisis and to make food systems more resilient and robust so they can withstand increasing volatility and climate shocks, deliver affordable and sustainable healthy diets for all, and decent livelihoods for food system workers. So just a little bit of background on that. It goes a lot into food access and how our lives are affected by that. So how about we go to our first question? And I would like to ask, how do you all celebrate World Food Day? It's not like you're celebrating Christmas or anything, but it's more like, how do you, as medical enthusiasts, medical professionals, how do you view it and recognize it?
So World Food Day is something that I haven't religiously celebrated for years, but I feel like World Food Day is every day in my world in terms of really focusing on the importance of nutrition, the whole food plant-based style of eating as a foundation of good health. And as a part of that emphasis, you have to look at, issues of accessibility. Who has access to these foods? You have to look at why they have access, why certain people have access to these foods. And so when I think about World Food Day and just generally how to expand this style of eating for as many people as possible, it's really, throughout my whole career, been kind of a multi-pronged approach. Not just kind of that individual care provision that I do as a physician, but also thinking about food policy and access issues as well. So I think that that's kind of how I personally, bring my approach to World Food Day.
Right. Okay. Nice.
And for me, I think it's really valuable when we have these special days or some special month. Of course, this topic is important all times of the year, but can be really valuable, especially with how much is going on in the world, to have one day to really emphasize the importance of all the different things you just mentioned. So I think word of mouth sharing it is really so valuable to just put this on people's radar and just kind of put it out there so people really understand the multifactorial nature of food and farming and all the above. I personally plan to, if I'm not studying, go to my local farmers market and really help support local, because I know that is one of many ways to kind of help boost these causes and really support the local economy as well as their farming practices. And really, again, just kind of sharing it with my peers, because I think it's really valuable. There's so much going on, but really the core of so many issues, both health and otherwise, do have to do with food and farming. And so I think just, spreading the news, spreading the word is really valuable.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's an awesome opportunity to focus on food access, food insecurity, to focus on the foods that we're eating and making sure that all populations have access to healthy food. So all these things are important on every day, really, but it's great to have one day of a year that people can focus on that, especially right now with there's so many other distractions going on. It's interesting that it occurs at this time. So I'm excited.
Absolutely, absolutely. And actually, that has a lot to do with our next question. I can't wait to get into this actually. What issues in our communities arise with lack of access to health promoting foods?
This is a huge question, and I think that it's like the elephant in the room. You have 10 people who are all seeing different kind of dimensions of the problem or issue. The first thing that comes to mind for me and a lot of the communities that I work with are traditionally underserved, is the practice of food apartheid, and thinking about kind of the political and policy decisions that have been made historically to create communities where there just simply aren't physical spaces for grocery stores, but that being a result of kind of systemic racism and policy. So food apartheid is definitely one of them. The other topic I really like to highlight in terms of, disparities in food access and quality of food and also consumption is the practice of marketing and how certain establishments actually prey on communities of color in terms of their marketing. And this is a multi-billion-dollar business in terms of getting certain communities, again, mostly low-income and communities of color, to buy these hyper-processed and addicting products. And so those are the two dynamics that I really want to highlight. And I'm sure my co-panelists will focus on others, but big pictures, they're systems level issues that create the reality that we see in terms of disparities in access. And I think that's the big takeaway for me.
Oh, most def.
Yeah, just to expand, I believe when we really have a deep understanding of the impact that different types of food and nutrition have on various levels of health, it really should show that food access, food accessibility should be a major part in medicine. And as a medical student, this is something I really try to push for in the curriculum, because if food impacts energy, mood, endless chronic illnesses, then wouldn't it make sense to really put a huge highlight on this in the curriculum moving forward as future physicians? Because if we aren't asking the questions, if we are just making assumptions about the accessibility that our patients have, we could be missing out on a huge hole in their health and wellness. And at the end of the day, that really is our goal, is to bring livelihood and health to these communities. And if we are not putting more emphasis, time, and resources on the topic of food accessibility, I don't believe that we can really hit our goal of providing the best care possible.
Oh, very, very true. Dr. Judy?
Yeah, too often people assume in the medical community that if people don't eat healthy, it's because of choice. Like that's the only factor in their mind. Right. But once you really start to dig into it, as Dr. Kadira mentioned about the systemic things that are in place to make it very challenging for certain populations to have access to healthy food, such as where the grocery stores are, whether there are healthy restaurants in their neighborhood, whether they have access to transportation, whether they're working 2 jobs, and how far do they have to travel to go to a healthy restaurant or grocery store. Is a McDonald's the cheapest and most affordable thing for them to eat and buy? So there's a lot of different issues that are at play, and they may seem overwhelming to tackle from a systematic standpoint, but at the end of the day, each person can do their own little part in whatever community that they're in. For me, it stems from empowering people and encouraging them to change their mindset, to believe that they do have power to change and make a difference, regardless of how challenging systems are. There's still opportunity even in those situations.
Oh, totally. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
Just to kind of make it more conversational, one thing that came to mind when Brooke and Dr. Judy were talking is just the role that we as healthcare providers, and I know we're all, future doctor and 2 physicians on the panel, is that we as an establishment are doing a disservice to our patients by not emphasizing the role of nutrition and health from head to toe. And I think the reason for that is there are many. One is that we get just a very pitiful amount of nutrition education during medical school. And I know, speaking for myself, a lot of my nutrition education in depth has come post-medical training that I've kind of taken upon myself to do. But bottom line is we really need to be, expanding the discussion of nutrition in the healthcare setting. And I think that, like Dr. Judy was saying as well, this is an empowering message when people realize like it really doesn't take dramatic changes to start to reap the health benefits. And it can be an incremental process, but even in the context of, limited access to certain foods, there are still small things that each of us can do. And that is what I feel like is a hopeful message as we work on all the systems level issues that need to be worked on.
Right.
I would love to bounce off that. I think a huge part of this is judgment and is assumptions. It's so easy as you move down to see, oh, XYZ is associated with being overweight. So that and just weight is, if you look at weight or, the side effects of nutrition in a very simplified form, it can seem like, are you trying or not? Are you not trying? And I think it's extremely valuable for both providers and everyone else to really educate themselves and open their minds, because if you do not understand just the multiple dimensions that can impact someone's food choices, it's going to be very easy to judge them very quickly, and we don't get anywhere there. If anything, we build negative relationships and tensions. And so really being as open-minded as possible and just understand that, I recently watched a webinar on food excess, and it's not even just income. I learned a lot about disability and how that impacts food security. There's so many different factors, and just keeping as open-minded as possible and just being compassionate is just so important moving forward, because you never know what it is that could impact someone's ability to access food.
Totally. And I'm going to have to say that I love the word empower. Like when you empower someone, you can encourage them pretty much to do anything, even outside of their comfort zone. So I'm sure within your fields, empowering is just a really good tool to encourage your patients or even your friends and family to do things that are health promoting. So I love that. Awesome. Okay, cool. Oh, and also, by the way, I'm trying to make it so we had like 5 or 6 questions. So we're going to hard stop at 7. Is that cool, Dr. Judy?
Yeah.
Okay, sweet. All right, sweet. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go to our next question. So what are some meal suggestions for satiation on a plant-based diet? Like what kind of meals would you suggest for patients or anyone who is seeking a plant-based diet, a plant-based lifestyle rather?
So people often say that when they transition, that they find that they're hungry oftentimes. That's because the plant-based diet is not as calorically dense as meat and dairy. So you have to eat a larger volume of food to feel full. Eating plant-based fats help with that. So eating nuts, avocados. I use oil as well. So, for me, I feel I'm always hungry, and I have to make a point to eat avocados, and I eat nuts and other sources of fat and in my diet to not be as hungry, but I'm still always hungry. So you just have to eat more food.
Right.
Because I eat a whole food plant-based diet. I don't eat really processed food, fried foods or anything like that. It's really mostly fruits, vegetables, beans. I eat processed meats, the veggie meats sometimes, but really not very often. So that's what I would say. Eat the healthy plant-based fats.
And I would say
protein too. Plant-based protein and fat will help you to feel more full.
Definitely. I definitely agree with that in terms of folks who are transitioning to that whole food plant-based. Like she's saying, it's definitely less calorically dense. One thing that I find helps is really focusing also on those healthy carbs, like the complex carbohydrates. That's going to add really good bulk and all that fiber that's going to contribute to fullness as well. So thinking about our whole grains, thinking about the sweet potatoes. I'm a big sweet potato lady. Like you'll rarely find a plate where I don't have like a ton of sweet potatoes piled high. And that's what leaves me feeling full and satisfied, and that I really had a hearty meal. So I would say those healthy carbs to add on to the healthy fats too.
Yeah, and to kind of take a turn from a little less on nutrition and more on just sustainability of the lifestyle, something that I really recommend is tweaking the meals you're familiar with. I think it's
Yes.
very common, especially if you go to some random, vegan social media page. It can seem like abstract, crazy meals that you've never seen before. And it's really easy to say like, oh, I'm not comfortable with that. I'm not familiar with that. I guess I can't make it. Y'all, there's just so many phenomenal recipes. Like Google is your best friend. How can I make a plant-based Chipotle bowl? How can I make a plant-based spaghetti, chili? Pick the foods that you know and love and see how we can tweak it into the plant side. I was helping someone out one day and she had mentioned in her culture how vegetables weren't a big part. And, I asked her like, oh, well, I'm sure it's a side dish or something like that. How can we switch up these ratios so you're not doing something completely new, but we're still putting it and making more plant heavy? So I think that's something that I recommend to a lot of people because it can seem kind of daunting at first, especially if you aren't lucky enough to have a community of those around you and be very versed in all the different options. So I really think, not thinking you have to make completely new meals on top of all the nutrition that they mentioned. And I definitely agree with the sweet potato. I loaded sweet potato with beans and a bunch of other goodies that I find
so good.
fills me up. Yeah, and then if you did a cashew queso sauce, you get those fats in, maybe some avocado. I find that to me is one of the most satiating plant-based meals.
Oh, yum.
Agreed.
Delicious. Yeah. Oh, like sweet potato, black beans, like baked together, like in a way.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
please.
They're a match made in
I
heaven.
love
Sweet potatoes and black beans.
Most def. Okay, cool. Next question. So what are some of the most common mistakes people should watch out for when transitioning to plant-based eating?
So I'm sure they can touch on this as well, but really just understanding that your gut will adjust. I think it can be really scary at first if someone all of a sudden goes from not having a lot of fiber to having a lot of fiber. It takes a while for the, bacteria in your gut to really adjust to be able to process that fiber. So there might be a few days of a bit uncomfortable situations. And so I think it's really beneficial to ease into it if you can. I was just talking to my mom, they were trying to increase, they're like 15 bean soup. And I was like, is that the best next step? Like maybe we can do a 10 bean or, kind of try and balance it out. And just the gradual approach, I think for a lot of people can be good, especially because at the end of the day, our body is impacted by food. And so if you make a change really quickly, you could see negative effects and just say, oh, it's not for me, when really that's just your body saying that it's adjusting. So one of the things I see is that if it doesn't work right away, definitely see, Google how to adjust to a plant-based diet. It will definitely be your best friend because it is hard for a lot of people to kind of just make the switch like that.
And I would say it's hard, not just from kind of a physiologic digestion perspective, but also mindset wise. This can be a huge, tremendous lifestyle shift for people to make, to go from, years and years, perhaps decades of the standard American diet to this whole food plant-based diet. It's a dizzying transition. And so to Brooke's point, having more of an incremental approach can do wonders, not just for digestion, but just for sustainability as well. And coming from kind of the pediatrician family wellness perspective, when we're trying to bring the whole unit on board, or at least to get their consent to try, having more of an incremental approach can be much more palatable and also, again, sustainable for families to dip their toe into the world of plant-based eating.
Yeah, and to add what both these ladies have said, I would say it's important when you're transitioning or new to a vegan or plant-based diet to not compare yourself to other people, because everyone else is doing something different. If you go on the vegan Facebook groups, if you get on Instagram, everyone thinks they are a nutritionist or a doctor or the expert in nutrition, veganism, or whatever it is. So you have to know your why and why you're doing it. And you decide how you want to do it. No one else can really tell you exactly how you have to do it,
If someone is stuck with the foods available in corner stores or convenience stores, which foods should they focus on for better nutrition? Very interesting. All right. Brooke, you want to start?
Yeah, so Obviously, this is a really heavy question, and it's really tricky, something that when you try to explain ultra processed, the idea of how can we be closer to the source of the original food as possible. Maybe that looks like fruit chunks, maybe that looks like nuts, whatever. It's really powerful to kind of look at the food that you have if we're focusing on nutrition and kind of say, okay, like what was this made out of? How closely does this look like that? And so that can be really beneficial. And so kind of this idea of whole foods, of course, each corner store is going to have a variety of it. And so I think, rather than focusing on some of the more negative stuff like the sugar and the salt, how can we really just look at the food, see how closely does this look like a peanut or a potato or a fruit, and how can I just incorporate it more? And obviously it's going to be tricky because unfortunately we see a lot of those times that especially the fresh products are more expensive, which really just breaks my heart. A lot of these subsidized things are going to be the stuff that's more ultra processed. And so really just kind of how can you work with what you have and just always give yourself grace, because if you find yourself in a position where that's where you can access it, unfortunately, there's only so much you can do. And so really feeling down on yourself because you can't access, these acai bowls and flax seeds and all this other stuff is only going to add to the situation. It's going to add to the stress, which can impact you, on a physical level. And so, and for me, really just seeing how much of those more whole food products can you incorporate with what you have.
Right.
Yeah, and I would also add, in addition to that, is look into gardening, whether you can get a pot and grow some tomatoes. A lot of people have had success with growing tomatoes, peppers, those tend to grow easy. Sometimes lettuces too, they don't require a lot of space. So you can go to Walmart or Home Depot or Lowe's and get a pot or a few pots, put them in your porch or even in your house, depending on what plant you're getting, and grow some vegetables that way. And also look into farmers markets, if those are not too far from people, but I would definitely emphasize the gardening piece if possible.
Yeah, I agree with both of you ladies. I love the idea of keeping a sense of grace towards ourselves on the journey and recognizing that everybody has different resources in this chapter that might be different in a different chapter, but kind of going back to kind of the challenge of shopping healthfully when there really aren't that many options. I like to bring it back to shopping the perimeter of the grocery store, for instance, where you focus on stuff that's in a bag or in a can, and that's okay. Every store is going to be different, but if there's like a 99-cent bag of brown rice, for instance, that's a meal for several people that can be quickly prepared with like a can of beans, or if they have dried beans, that's like literally one of my favorite meals in the world that costs less than a handful of dollars. And then I love the idea of, trying to supplement more of the packaged items with the fresh produce, but even with like, pretty bare bones corner store or grocery store, look for those little whole food items like the beans. It's okay if they're canned. If they have sodium added or salt added, you can rinse those bad boys off and reduce some of the sodium level. Cook that with rice. If they have pasta, you can do that with a plain tomato sauce. So there are ways. It does force you to be a bit creative in terms of what you have, but it's unfortunately a challenge that way too many families have, but those are just some approaches in terms of looking for those opportunities in hard circumstances.
Yeah, and just to back off Dr. Judy real quick, that's something I have talked about with some of the people, the researchers and physicians on my campus, is really some kind of familiar or community gardening, because in that way it's a little less pressure, it can be a little less daunting. And so I think that's a phenomenal idea, because I think some people can kind of shy away from that, they aren't familiar with that, but if you can make it some kind of team or group effort, I think that you might find more success that way.
What advice would you give someone who doesn't have access to organic produce but still wants to eat plant-based? Y'all basically pretty much touched on that a little bit, but what would y'all say about that?
So I would say that you don't have to practice organic, first of all. You don't even have to practice fresh fruits and vegetables. You can start where you are. The typical American is not eating nearly enough vegetables, so that's a big problem. So if you go from that to eating more vegetables and you buy frozen vegetables that are, not like cooked or very minimally cooked, most of them are, that's better than eating no vegetables at all. So that's kind of where I would say to start. Like wherever you are, pick something that's easy and obtainable for you to do. If it's frozen vegetables and that's step one for you, then do that. As you move along in your journey and you're like, you know what, I think I want to upgrade. I think I want to purchase fresh fruits and vegetables, then do that. I don't buy frozen vegetables myself because I prefer fresh and I like to cook. But someone who's not used to cooking or who, you know, hasn't been able to figure out how to make the time or doesn't have the time yet, that may not be something that's doable to them in that moment. So I would just say start wherever you are and you don't have to purchase organic.
I agree 1,010%. And I feel like it kind of goes back to the whole concept of that incrementalism, where it does not need to be perfect. First of all, perfection doesn't exist. It's a myth. And second of all, I feel like it becomes a mental obstacle for so many of us on our different wellness journeys. And so this whole organic versus non-organic, I think it's just distraction. Dr. Judy boiled it down. Most of us aren't eating enough. Let's eat what we can and start from there. And yeah, I totally agree with that.
I think it's extremely valuable to, just understand. Someone even asked me, like, is organic kale better than regular kale? I'm like, the question is, are you eating the kale or the vegetable or whatever it is produce that we're talking about, not necessarily what little title is on it, especially if you're in a position where you're not regularly incorporating it. You know, even for myself, I love fresh stuff, but as a student, I do a lot of frozen vegetables. A lot of it's not organic. And really the highest priority should be, how can we get more plants in? How can we get a variety of plants in? And let's just go from there. That's a really valuable thing we talk about in culinary medicine, is just meet everyone where you're at. And you have to do that with yourself. If yourself is not eating vegetables at all, organic doesn't really seem like the logical next step. So really, how can we take the baby steps? So I totally agree with everything they said.
Love it. Okay, cool. So what are staples, whether it is food or appliances, that people should have in their kitchen? Dr. Judy?
Oh, wow. So I love appliances. So let me see what's the most useful staple that everyone should have. I like knife. I feel like a good chef's knife that's not dull is really good, especially when you're chopping and cutting vegetables. Like sweet potatoes can be really hard to cut, and squash and pumpkin if you have a dull knife. So I think having a good knife is probably my most valuable kitchen asset. Right now, I just find joy actually in chopping vegetables. It sounds weird, but I honestly feel like I'm a chef because I'm using a chef knife. So that's what I would say probably would be the most important thing to get. Dull knives actually are more dangerous for you, and you are more likely to cut your finger on a dull knife.
Very true.
I think it's really valuable, some kind of pressure cooker. Not to, like, I'm not sponsored by Instant Pot, but I think a lot of people, for like the dry rice, the dry beans, I think a big daunting part of that could be the time. And so if you can find some kind of pressure cooker, which honestly, y'all, a lot of times they do come on sale, that could be really valuable, because I think that can be some of the, kind of blockades, but you can make full meals in one of these things. And so whether you're whether you're cooking for a lot of different people or you're batch cooking for yourself, I feel like something where it can help you make a lot of food at once, a lot of helpful food at once, could be really beneficial. And then food-wise, yeah, definitely beans, the lentils, they're going to be able to fit into so many different recipes, and they're cheap, and they're super high in nutrients. And so that's definitely, I feel like, something that should be a staple in a lot of people's kitchens.
Yeah, I was also going to add too, my staple food that I always keep around is sweet potatoes, because I just love eating them. So yeah, sweet potatoes and beans, I always have in my pantry, and I always have a lot of fruit and vegetables, but those two in particular.
I would say for me, appliance-wise, the Instapot, that's hands down my number one go-to. As a busy mom, and just like, life is crazy, which it is for many of us. The Instapot has been a lifesaver. Like Brooke was saying, like, you can do your whole grains, you can do stews, you can do beans. I can make a batch of fresh chickpeas in 35 minutes that are the most tender and succulent you've ever had, that can then go into making, a hummus or a stew. So I would say a pressure cooker, we have an Instapot, no sponsorship. And I would say the second appliance would probably be a food processor. Chopping, it depends on what mood I'm in terms of, is it a flow meditative activity, or is it one where I'm like, I just want to get it done? If I'm in I just want to get it done mood, you can throw your carrots and onion and all the vegetables that maybe you're going to saute or cook or even eat into the food processor, and that can be wonderful. And it's also great to make banana ice cream, which is another staple food in our home.
The best. The best.
Yeah.
First of all, I feel like we need to have a sweet potato party because it seems like we all love sweet potatoes, like myself. And then one more food staple actually that's really healthy with medical school is frozen kale and spinach and just greens in general. I find that I can just saute it, or, you know, again, if I'm a really busy week, didn't get to the grocery store, I can somehow always find a way to incorporate those in whatever meal I'm doing. And we do know that, you know, dark leafy greens are some of the most nutrient dense. And so in terms of like, you know, I live by myself, and so I don't like to waste stuff. And so I always make sure I'm stocked with frozen greens, because when things get busy, I find that it is a really easy way to incorporate these really nutrient dense foods and honestly, whatever I'm making.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And you know, that's also something that I'm sure other people have wondered, because I can be a picky eater like most people. And it's a texture thing for me. So is the texture of frozen greens still okay once you saute it, or does it get like?
Yeah, so I mean, so that's the thing, is kind of what's with, I'll put that in a super spicy like chili, or I'll put that in a tofu scramble, or I'll put that in a pasta sauce. So it's kind of, I feel like it's never I'm not just kind of eating it by itself. It's kind of what you surround it with it. And y'all, spices are your best friends. It's beautiful. They have the antioxidants. They have so many nutrients, and they make your food taste good. Like, we don't deserve spices. And so it really is, you know, incorporating these other textures, such as the tofu scramble or the beans or the tomatoes and spices. And then it's kind of like, I don't think you'd really notice the difference at that point. So yeah, so I don't necessarily take the frozen greens and just put in like a salad or something else. That I would just have it in there. Intentional about there's some kind of like stew situation or something where it's not the star of the show, but can just really elevate the health of whatever meal I'm making.
Oh, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, good to try in the future. All right, great. So I know a few of you have some great tips on this question. Are there any health concerns people should worry about with transitioning their children to plant-based eating?
Yes. So let me jump into that one.
Let the pediatrician answer that question.
Absolutely.
So the first thing that comes to mind with this question is many fewer than most people realize. I think that when folks start hearing about children and plant-based diets, the alarm bells go off like, oh my gosh, this child is going to be malnourished. So I think that ensuring, if it's a healthcare provider that you're working with, that this is going to be a well-planned diet, that we're tending to the main nutrients that are of concern. And by those, usually we're talking about like the calcium, vitamin D, iron sources, B12 is of particular importance to everybody, definitely children as well, and omega-3s to some degree as well, as we have growing information in terms of the importance of brain health and general health. So those are the main nutrients that tend to be of most concern for children. Focusing on, you know, specifically the B12, that is something that absolutely should be supplemented for folks of all of the lifespan. And then getting into the ones that typically we associate with dairy, for instance, like the calcium and vitamin D. Vitamin D is fortified in milk. That is not something that's even naturally occurring. And so that's something that could certainly come in different forms, whether it's through fortified plant milk, which I do recommend for younger children, or through a multivitamin that also would be inclusive of B12 as well. So that kind of covers those two nutrients. And then, you know, we get to thinking about iron, which we can readily get from our food sources, which is the incredible thing about the whole food plant-based diet. Like, you know, iron, beans, and greens, those are the things, and it's in other things as well, like different seeds, but beans and greens are something that we would hope to be kind of the foundation of that plant-based diet for folks of all ages, and that is a perfect source of iron. You do have to be careful about serving it with like vitamin C rich sources of food that helps with absorption. Of the iron and plant-based sources. But again, the big point is that that is a food-based micronutrient. Okay, so I think my biggest takeaway is that it is one of the most health-promoting diets, if not the most health-promoting diet for folks of all life ages, especially for children, because it's literally primary prevention. You get to set kids up for not having these chronic conditions that, Dr. Judy is treating. And Brooke, I'm not sure which kind of age range you're going for down the road, but, we having the ability to keep kids well and to not have the heart disease, the diabetes, the hypertension, and cholesterol issues. Like, that is the beauty of this. And so it can be done. And it can be done quite well. The end.
Yes.
There you have it. Yes.
So I actually am interested in med-peds, which for those who don't know is actually adult and pediatric population, because I really am, I think there's a lot of potential in advocating for the pediatric population when it comes to health, because like you said, so much of health can be, in childhood can really reflect, like, you're 5 times as much likely to obtain a lot of these different things depending on what, your lifestyle looks like as a kid. And so in that respect, I think there's so much potential moving forward in advocacy for these populations, because at the end of the day, we obviously want to set kids up for success, right? And so I think she covered most of it. Just a little fun aside that I kind of came over through some research that I did. And this kind of helps in all different parts of pediatric eating, but just a cute little note is to actually call food things different. And so some of the research I looked at, it's like, instead of lentils, call them, oh my goodness, like, what was it, like bear pebbles or something cute like that.
Bear pebbles.
It was something along those lines. How can you make the food fun? And then another thing, which I feel like only the pediatrician should be talking about, but we did just have a pediatric culinary medicine class, and it talked about the benefits of, having the children's meals be some kind of extension of the family meal, and maybe not making something completely different like chicken nuggets just because they don't want to eat, the spaghetti, but how can you, make sure you're finding a kid version of that, and then that way it could kind of feel this like bonding because y'all all are eating the same things, which I think can be really beautiful, because that can encourage the whole family to incorporate more plants in as they are supporting and setting up their kid for success.
And I was also going to add about intuitive eating, which I know Dr. Kadiri, you talk about a lot. And there's also another pediatrician who's plant-based. I'm going to mention Dr. Yami Lancaster. She has a book about intuitive eating. Parents often have the concern about how do they get their kids to eat healthy foods. And one of the things about the premise of intuitive eating is that allow your child to be the judge of when they're full and when they need to eat. So not forcing them to eat, giving them healthy food options so that there's no other option, like, Brooke mentioned, having different meals for the kids and different meals for the adults, but letting them choose when they're finished eating and letting them choose when they're ready to eat, because children are able to actually really detect and tell when they're hungry and when they need to eat. And the more that we, when parents stress about that and become very anxious and make mealtime anxious, they can kind of set it up for the child to develop unhealthy relationships with food and anxiety going forward.
Yeah,
that's very important.
Intuitive eating is something I've personally started to get really into recently. And I think another appeal to me for looking at the pediatric and adult population is that, again, not understanding those hunger cues, having disordered eatings oftentimes really start in childhood, starts with different types of coping mechanisms or restrictions tied to food. And so really prioritizing that in childhood could really set someone up. And for me personally, that's something that I deal with in childhood and do have effects with later, which is actually what pulled me to pediatrics and intuitive eating, because you can have such a huge impact on the rest of someone's life in this population. And it's extremely, extremely valuable.
Yeah, it really is. One thought that just came to mind was related to kind of the idea of the division of labor between what parents' role is versus what the child's role is. And so as a pediatrician, I often have families who are apprehensive about making healthy swaps or, cutting out some of the processed foods to make room for more of the whole plant types of foods. And, realizing that, this is literally like our job as the responsible adults to do the best we can, recognizing everybody has different means and, levels of access, but doing the best that we can to provide healthful, balanced meals to our children. And then it's the kids' job from then to decide what they're going to eat from that plate, how much. And that's just something that personally, as a mom, putting my mom hat on, this is something that I personally have have had to retrain myself. I remember when my kid was like an early toddler, I'd be like so fixated. I'm like, she's not eating enough. She's not eating enough. She's not getting enough calories. She's like eating 2 bites of avocado. She's like, I'm good. And I'm like, but you have your whole plate of food. And so like, but you know, that once the tension and that power struggle gets set up, they're definitely not going to eat more. But I realized as I started to kind of loosen the reins and just let the process do what it does, she starts to pick up the cues. Like she's going to eat when she's hungry. She's going to look at what mom and dad are eating, like, oh, that looks good. And then she's going to want to eat more of that herself. Kind of to Brooke's point about the power of modeling, like that cannot be overstated. But there's a lot of different levels here. For sure. But bottom line is doing what we can to set kids up for success from as early on in life as possible. And then partnering hopefully with a respectful healthcare provider who can, you know, help to monitor and obviously do the things you would do for any other child and any other style of eating. And I think that it's getting easier to do that as this style of eating is becoming more professionally recognized as a perfectly acceptable and health promoting way of eating for children.
Awesome. Oh, wow. You know what? By the way, I'm going to ask y'all about like, you know, any closing remarks in a second, but this was fantastic, y'all. Oh, I learned some stuff today. Okay, great. All right. I'm gonna go back to that. So wonderful. Thank you all so much for your remarks and everything that you said. Do y'all have any closing remarks or, you know, telling people your social media, all those types of things?
Yeah, so I love to use my social media as an extension of my education to others, both with medicine and public health. So you can find me at Beets by Brooke, the food beats, so BET on Instagram. And so that's where I put a lot of my content and just kind of share this journey of, you know, focusing on plant-based nutrition as a medical student.
Perfect. And I am on social media as well. I'm on Instagram mostly at this point at Kadira Huff MD. And I have a new business that's just getting up and running called Sprouting Wellness, which is essentially a virtual wellness lifestyle hub for families to help to move them along this spectrum of behavior change. And so Sprouting Wellness MD on Instagram.
So thank you so much for the opportunity to be on today. So I am on Instagram and Facebook at the Plant-Based MD, and I share nutrition information and lifestyle information as well. And individuals can reach out to me through those platforms, or they can go to my website, which is theplantbasedmd.com, to see more about my services, which include nutrition consultations and lifestyle medicine visits virtually.
Awesome. Awesome. Once again, thank you all so much. And once again, everyone, thank you for watching. We appreciate you. I'm your host. I didn't get to mention in the beginning. I'm your host, Jamila Alfred, Multimedia Marketing Director for Afro-Vegan Society. And we'll catch y'all at the next event. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank y'all so much.
Thanks for tuning into this session. Support Afro-Vegan Society's work by donating today. Click to watch more videos from the World Food Day series.